There were many dragons flying around a castle that stood at the center of the giant mountains. Inside that castle, the great warrior Burmit, along with his 4 comrades, was heading toward the demonic city of Hellmouth to defeat the Demon King. 3 out of the 5 Demon Kings had already been slain, and only 2 remained. As they advanced, their path was blocked by countless monsters. Burmit and his companions continuously used their powers to attack them. Burmit wielded his sword skillfully, Senya cast powerful spells through her staff, Anise bestowed blessings while swiftly decapitating the monsters, and Marone swung his massive weapon to strike down several foes at once. Lastly, there was Hamel, whose terrifying speed allowed him to slice through the monsters effortlessly. Hamel felt jealous of Burmit, even though he called him his rival. No one else agreed with that, as their strength was on entirely different levels. Hamel remarked that they had already defeated all the underlings, but then he noticed a demon launching an attack on Burmit. Without hesitation, he stepped in and took the blow himself to protect him. Hamel was gravely injured, and Burmit immediately fought the demon, cutting it down in a single strike. The others rushed to Hamel's side. Hamel said he had no regrets dying, for it was an honorable death, one given in the name of Burmit. Before taking his final breath, he asked Burmut to promise that he would defeat all the remaining Demon Kings. Burmut swore upon his title as a warrior that he would slay every last one of them. Hamel then requested Anise to pray for his soul, praised Moroni for his courage, and was about to confess his feelings for Senya before he passed away. A young boy was reading those passages in a book, and in frustration he kicked it away, saying he had never said anything like that. He always grew angry whenever he read what was written in the book and swore that if he ever found the author, he would definitely beat him up. He wondered why people called it the Great, the Wise, the Pure, and the Valiant Book, and whether it had really been written by the scoundrel he had beaten up 300 years ago. He wished he could ask those 4 why they hadn't done anything about it. Hadn't it ever crossed their minds to protect the honor of their comrade? Still, it wasn't as if they could have imagined that he would one day be reincarnated with the memories of his former life. In truth, he was Hamel, the same warrior who had lost his life while trying to slay a demon king 3 centuries ago. He had now been reborn as the descendant of the great warrior Vermouth, and his new name was Eugene Lionheart, a 13-year-old boy. Eugene recalled that Burmut had never been a womanizer, so he wondered what could have caused such a change over the years. Moreover, Burmut was not even human, and only the offspring of his lawful wife had been acknowledged as his direct descendants. Although Eugene's family bore the surname Lionheart, they were merely regarded as distant relatives. He had been forbidden from training with real swords or using mana before the blood confirmation, which was why he practiced only with wooden swords. However, that day would be the last time he used one. Taking up the wooden sword, he slashed at a training dummy the others had prepared and cut it apart with brutal force. A man approached, remarking that Eugene had destroyed another dummy. That man was his father, who couldn't help but be astonished by Eugene's physique. His body was already so well built and muscular. He realized that Eugene neither spoke nor behaved like a child, and there was not a trace of innocence in his eyes. Even though Eugene had lost his mother at a young age, he never once seemed to miss her. Eugene kicked the broken dummy, complaining that the village blacksmith's craftsmanship was awful. He couldn't believe the man dared to sell such poorly made junk for money. If he were in his father's place, he said, he would personally teach that blacksmith a lesson. His father tried to sound stern and said he would make sure to warn the blacksmith about it. That moment reminded him of the upcoming blood confirmation ceremony the next day, a twisted Leonhardt family tradition held once every 10 years. During the ceremony, both direct and distant descendants aged 10 to 15 gathered at the Leonhardt Manor, where the main family resided, to compete and prove who was most worthy of carrying the Leonhardt name. Unlike the distant relatives, however, the direct descendants were permitted to train with real weapons, something that deeply frustrated him. His father often thought that Eugene was so exceptional, it was hard to believe he was truly his own son. He even mused that perhaps his child should have been born into the main family, since if he had taken after him, he wouldn't possess such extraordinary talent, nor feel the painful difference between his gift and reality. Eugene, meanwhile, wondered quietly if something about all this was wrong. Even his father didn't say anything, but Eugene understood that his father was blaming himself for not being a good enough parent. His father, being emotional, asked him to promise that he wouldn't compete with the children from the main family. No matter how gifted Eugene might be, his father said, he wouldn't stand a chance against them since they had been training with real swords and mana from a young age. Eugene acted cheerful around him, but wondered if his father really wanted him to compete with a group of 10-year-olds, thinking it would bore him to death. There would be 3 children from the main family and 6 from distant relatives. 1 from the main family was the son of the first wife, while the other 2 were twins born to the mistress. 2 of the distant relatives came from high-ranking families, and the rest were considered weak. Eugene then cut down another training dummy, feeling excited to see what kind of people they would be. He later left for the blood confirmation ceremony in a carriage, recalling that in his past life he had referred to himself as a prodigy named Hamel. Ever since childhood, he had found it easy to learn new skills, and his abilities had always developed faster than others. But even then, he had been criticized by Bermut, who said that Hamel could have been stronger if he had put in more effort. Hamel had been infuriated because he had given his all to surpass the swordsman, yet it turned out that he wasn't the true prodigy. The real one was adept in both swordsmanship and magic, known as the God of Combat and the Archmaster. Bermut had originally been a duke in his homeland, but later retired and was celebrated as a warrior until the day he died. Another of Hamel's companions was Senya, who had been invited to the magic kingdom of Erath and became the youngest master of the magic tower. The third was Anais, a saint of the Holy Empire, Vayu Arias, who even had a sacred book of her teachings. The last was Moroni, who had founded a kingdom named after his own foolish name. All of them had gone on to live such glorious lives, which angered Eugene as he wondered why the Demon King was still alive when Bermut had promised to defeat all of them. Eugene had died fighting the Demon King of Incarnation in a castle during his past life as Hamel. However, he had made a pact with that Demon King, bringing the war to an end and ensuring peace for the next 300 years. A man named Gordon, who was traveling with him, wondered if Eugene felt nervous since life at Leonhardt Manor was said to be harsh and demanding. Eugene appreciated Gordon's advice. Gordon teased Eugene, telling him not to worry since there was still a long way to go before they reached Leonhardt Manor. Annoyed, Eugene asked whether it wasn't inconvenient to travel around when the estate was so large. Gordon explained that warp gates had been installed throughout the area, so traveling wouldn't be a problem. Eugene knew, however, that he didn't have permission to use those warp gates. After the long journey, he finally arrived at Leonhardt Manor, where he was warmly welcomed. As Eugene had expected, there was no welcome party for him, and everything seemed perfectly ordinary. He noticed the flag bearing the crest of Bermut of Leon, which was meant to be worn only on the left side of the chest. He then asked Gordon whether any of the other relatives had arrived. Gordon replied that Eugene was the first to arrive and requested permission to escort him to the guest house. As Eugene was being led there, he met a lady named Nina, who would be attending to all his needs during his stay, and instructed him to ring the bell if he needed anything. Eugene felt a bit pleased to have a personal maid assigned to him. Eugene sat down on the bed, wondering about Nina's age. She revealed that she was 16 and had already completed her training period. Eugene realized that they had deliberately assigned him a maid who had just finished her training, someone more likely to make mistakes, perhaps hoping he would complain about her performance. It seemed they really wanted to bother him. He began talking with her and asked if she knew when the other relatives would be arriving. Nina replied that they were expected to come within 4 days. Eugene then stood up and asked her to show him the training ground. The scene shifted to the area outside the castle, where the twins were talking about Eugene, who was the same age as them. They mocked him, saying that since he came from the rural town in the west, he probably used a wooden sword instead of a real one. They even laughed about the carriage he had arrived in, saying that Eugene should take responsibility for tarnishing the reputation of the main family's property. The girl agreed, and they both decided to go and scold him. However, the boy clarified that they were only going to give him a warning. As they headed out, another boy saw them from the window of his room, but the girl shot him such a sharp glare that he immediately grew frightened and shut the window. Meanwhile, Eugene was training with a spear on the practice grounds. He recalled that even in his past life as Hamel, he had never neglected his training, and since his reincarnation, he had been pushing his body especially hard. Despite the intensity, he never grew tired of it, and his injuries healed remarkably fast. As a descendant of Bermut, the power of his new body exceeded his imagination, As he continued swinging his spear, Nina watched in astonishment, startled by the speed and precision of his movements and the way his strikes flowed seamlessly from his arm. The twins approached, wondering what Eugene was doing. Nina grew frightened upon seeing Cayenne and Ciel and wondered why they had come there. Cayenne said he was only asking what Eugene was doing. Eugene wondered if Cayenne couldn't understand that he was practicing with the spear and even called him an idiot. Ciel used that insult to provoke Cayenne further. Cyan shouted at Eugene, demanding an apology. Eugene calmly apologized without showing much reaction, but Cyan grew angrier, saying the apology wasn't sincere and that Eugene should bow to show respect. Eugene refused, saying they were of the same age and that it didn't matter even if they weren't. Cyan, clearly irritated, said that just because Eugene's surname was Leonhardt, it didn't mean they were equals. Ciel then mentioned the carriage, and Cyan shouted that Eugene should go clean the one he had arrived in, adding that the seeds inside might stink because of Eugene's body odor. Eugene turned to Ciel and told her to clean the carriage instead. Ciel was shocked and looked at everyone in disbelief. Kian glared at Eugene, shouting how he dared to order his servant like that and whether he was ignoring Cyan's command. Eugene simply suggested that they become friends, so the three of them introduced themselves. However, Cayenne remained angry and refused to befriend Eugene, feeling that Eugene had deliberately ignored his orders. Finally, he placed his wooden sword nearby and challenged Eugene to a duel. Eugene teased Cayenne, telling him that he shouldn't challenge others to duels so easily and asking if he could just leave him alone. Cayenne mocked Eugene in return, saying that if he was scared to duel with him, then he should simply bow down and apologize. Eugene replied that he wasn't scared. He just didn't want to duel or apologize. Cyan shouted in anger, wondering if Eugene was trying to run away because his parents had never taught him the true meaning of honor. In response, Eugene calmly removed the gloves from his hands, his expression turning serious, and asked Cyan to throw down his handkerchief. As Eugene began removing his training weights, Cyan was left in shock. Still, since he was the one who had issued the challenge, he couldn't back out now and declared that he would punish Eugene to reclaim his honor. Eugene accepted the duel and, in an instant, dashed forward, striking Cayenne with his spear and knocking him backward, securing an easy victory. Ciel gasped in fear and rushed to Cayenne's side. Cayenne suddenly vomited, and Ciel turned toward Eugene, accusing him of fighting dishonorably. Eugene calmly stated that the duel had begun the moment the challenger had thrown down the handkerchief, and it was Cyan's fault for letting his guard down. Ciel reluctantly agreed, but argued that Eugene must have been training with Mana. Eugene denied it, explaining that distant relatives weren't allowed to train with Mana before the blood confirmation ceremony. Ciel called him a liar, insisting there was no way he could swing his spear that powerfully or move that fast without Mana training, since Cyan hadn't even had time to react. Eugene smirked and remarked that it seemed those eyes weren't just for decoration, adding that he had been hearing such things for quite some time. He subtly twisted his words to make it sound as if Cyan lacked experience. In his mind, he thought that Cyan surely had potential for the future, but as a descendant of Barmet, he was acting rather pathetic. Despite trembling, Cyan struggled to stand and called Eugene a coward. Eugene assumed the twins must be similar in temperament. He then approached Cyan, saying that if he truly was a descendant of Leonhardt, he should accept his defeat with honor after the duel. As Eugene glanced at Cayenne's injured state, he thought it would be best to hold back for now. Suddenly, a man appeared, calling out to Cayenne. Eugene immediately sensed that the man was a knight employed by the male family and could tell from his presence that he was highly skilled. Cayenne called him Hazara and began crying, saying he had lost the duel to a mere country bumpkin. The man, whose name was Hazar, looked at Eugene and apologized for not introducing himself earlier, then explained that he was Cyan's personal instructor. Eugene introduced himself in return. Hazar asked if Eugene was from Giddel, assuming he must belong to the Gerard family. Eugene confirmed this, saying that Gerard was indeed his father. Hazar then inquired about what exactly had happened. Eugene explained that Cheyenne had picked a fight with him and even insulted his father. Cheyenne kept denying it, but Eugene clarified that Cheyenne had mocked his father for failing to raise him properly and had even called him a coward. That was why Eugene had accepted the duel. Hazar acknowledged the situation and decided to take Cyan away to treat his injuries, expressing hope to meet Eugene again in the future. Ciel also left after saying goodbye to Eugene. Later, Eugene sat alone, quietly eating. Nina approached him while holding a piece of paper and told him that Deacon, Hansen, and Jules would arrive by noon the next day, while Gargis and Desira were scheduled to come that evening through the warp gates. Eugene realized that if everyone was arriving so soon, it meant the blood confirmation ceremony was about to begin. After finishing his meal, he stepped outside, thinking to himself that he was now about to start dealing with the descendants of Bermut. It wasn't as if he had chosen to be one of them. His fate as a descendant was merely the result of his reincarnation. Hazara, along with Kayan and Ciel, went to meet Annalicia, the second wife of Gilad Leonhardt. She asked Kayan to come closer and questioned whether it was true that he had challenged a distant relative to a duel and lost. Hazara confirmed it. Annalicia then told Cyan to step forward. She pressed her wooden fan against his chest, making him flinch in pain, and asked in disbelief if he had really been defeated in a single strike. She wondered aloud if Hazara was correct in saying that Eugene hadn't used any mana during the fight. Hazar affirmed it, explaining that Eugene, being the son of Gerard, had never trained with mana since his father possessed none in his body. Annalicia turned to Ciel and demanded to know exactly how Kayan had lost. Ciel explained that as soon as the duel began, Eugene thrust his spear forward. Cyan had tried to retreat, but Eugene's attack was so fast that he couldn't react in time. Understanding how the outcome was decided in just one move, Annalicia's anger flared. She slapped Kayan across the face, furious that he had lost to someone who had never undergone mana training. She demanded to know how he intended to face his father after such disgrace. Kayan began crying, begging her to forgive him. Annalicia then turned to Hazar and said that she would have killed him if her husband didn't hold him in such high regard as a knight. Instead, she ordered him to discipline Kayan and ensure that he never brought shame upon her again. Hazar bowed respectfully and took Cyan away from the room. As Annalicia stood there, a thought crossed her mind. She told Ciel to get close to Eugene, since he was strong enough to defeat Cyan. Though she deeply wished she could kill Eugene herself, she knew that doing so would raise suspicion. If a feud were to break out within their household, the guardians of the family code would be dispatched, a situation she had to avoid at all costs. Ciel agreed, saying she also wanted to get to know Eugene better, so she would find a way to get closer to him. The next day, the remaining 3 descendants, Deacon, Hansen, and Julius, arrived. While Eugene was training with sandbags tied to his hands and legs, Nina came and informed him that the guests had already reached. She appeared flustered and in a rush as she handed him his clothes, mentioning that the head of the Leonhardt family had come as well. Feeling dizzy with anxiety, she urged him to rest properly before going to greet them. Eugene replied that if he took a rest, he would only be late, and it was better to go while still drenched in sweat. Everyone had gathered, with 2 long rows of knights standing in formation to welcome the head of the Leonhardt family. Eugene noticed Annalicia standing with Cyan and Ciel, along with the lawful wife of the head, Theonis, and her eldest son, Yod, who was first in the line of succession and didn't seem well at that moment. Soon after, the head of the Leonhardt family, Gilad, arrived with his younger brother, Gione, both riding on horseback. Theonis remarked to Gilad that it would have been better if people had been informed beforehand, but Gilad responded that he was merely returning to his own home as the family head and saw no need for such a thing. He then turned to his son, noting how much he had grown and wondering if his combat skills had improved as well. Yod, looking uneasy, said he was doing his best to meet his father's expectations. Gilad also noticed Kayan and Ciel, commenting on how much they had grown. He then met his old friend Guilford, who had a child now, and saw 4 children who were distant relatives. Finally, Gilad suggested that they begin with the feast first and discuss the details of the blood confirmation afterward. During the feast, Gargis and Desira were also seated, and Eugene knew that the 2 had arrived together with Gilead through the warp gates. He assumed they must belong to 2 of the high-ranking branches among the distant relatives. However, there was one person at the table whom Eugene didn't recognize. Ciel turned to her father and asked who the unfamiliar guest was. Gilead replied that he had planned to introduce the man to them later. Before he could continue, the stranger with yellow hair stood up, greeted everyone politely, and introduced himself as Rovarian from the Red Magic Tower of Erot. Everyone was taken aback when they realized that Rovarian was none other than the master of the Red Magic Tower. Eugene was stunned, and a pang of emotion struck him as he learned that Rovarian had once been the apprentice of Senya. Nearly 3 centuries earlier, Senya had been the youngest person ever to become the master of the Red Magic Tower, and had even rewritten the official grimoire of Eroth. Senya's wisdom and teachings in magic had guided not only apprentices from other towers but also the masters themselves. The current masters of the Green and Red Magic Towers still revered her as their grandmaster. Eugene could never have imagined that he would one day meet someone connected to his old comrades. Gilead called Eugene over, mentioning that he had heard from Theonis that Cyan had insulted both Eugene and his father. Eugene confirmed it, but added that he no longer minded it. Gilead asked if that was because Eugene had won the duel, but Eugene replied that even if he had lost, he would have reacted the same way. He explained that it was only right to endure humiliation if one couldn't defend one's own honor. Gilead praised Eugene for his maturity. He then turned to his son, saying he wasn't ashamed that Cyan had lost the duel. Rather, he was disappointed that Cyan had looked to him for a reaction when he himself had been the one embarrassed by his own insult. Yet, despite that, Cyan still hadn't apologized to Eugene. Gilead urged his son to act honorably and offer a sincere apology to his opponent. Cyan eventually apologized, though Eugene could tell it was done unwillingly. During their conversation, Gilead admitted that he didn't know Eugene's father. Eugene reassured him that it was understandable, as they had lived deep in the countryside. The discussion then shifted to Eugene's training, and when he mentioned that he had trained entirely on his own, everyone at the table was astonished. Gilead, impressed and intrigued, couldn't help but feel that the upcoming blood confirmation that year would be remarkably interesting.